Sometimes as parents, I think we look at the world, at least I do, through the lens of conflict. That there's a right side and there's a wrong side, and I'm constantly fighting to get myself in the right camp and then get others to think about things from the right perspective. I do think that there's a reality of light and darkness and truth and falsehood that is important to hold on to. But today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, I want to revisit a story that we talked about a couple months ago with the LA Dodgers and their Pride Night, and how Christians on the LA Dodgers team brought back a faith and family night, not necessarily in an effort to fight back the darkness they saw from some things in society, but instead to celebrate the light of Jesus and what they know to be true. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark, be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, last month we ended up talking about the LA Dodgers and some challenging things that were coming out of the organization regarding a Pride Night. As part of that, the LA Dodgers opted to have a Christian Faith and Family Day, and it actually occurred on Sunday of this past week. By all accounts, it was a good time for everybody. I mean, singer Jeremy Camp performed, there were special hats that were given away, and several Christian players gave their testimonies about the strength that they get from their Christian faith. But what was noticeably missing, maybe, was protests, especially by LGBTQ groups. Now, the Dodgers, who have had some of probably what you would call, quote unquote, the most successful Pride Nights of any sports team in America, they kind of became the center of controversy, as we discussed last month, when they agreed to give a community service award to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, a group of drag nuns who have been working to do different charity work in their community over the last 30 years, in addition to really criticizing, critiquing, and those might be nice ways of saying it, the Christian faith. Now, the Dodgers disinvited them and then re-invited them. And then on June 16th, that Pride Night kind of had a flashpoint outside of Dodger Stadium with more than 2,000 protesters, many of them kind of coming from Christian and Catholic faith backgrounds, that stood in opposition to the Dodgers recognizing the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence on June 16th. Now, Dr. Kathy, have kind of purposefully set up this lead-in a way to kind of reflect what I see as much of the conversation that's happening in society right now. And I kind of want to explore it from that standpoint. Most of culture right now is kind of criticizing Christians for protesting Pride Night when many LGBTQ groups did not protest the faith night that the Dodgers had. Why wouldn't we find LGBTQ protesters at the faith night? Why is this such a noticeable time for the Christians to protest and not a noticeable time when the LGBTQ camp didn't protest?
I find that interesting as well. Two things come to mind. One is that there are people of faith who identify as LGBTQ. And so that would have been, a conflict of interest for them to protest another part of their identity. So that may be a reason. And my gut is that another reason is that they knew that it wouldn't matter. They can protest all they want. We're going to do what we know is the right thing to do, and the majority is going to win. And we, active evangelical Christians who care about families, are absolutely in the majority here. So those are the two things I think of. It is interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And what I saw out of this whole situation is the way that Clayton Kershaw and others on the team kind of stepped up to provide a lot of leadership here in a really important, what I would kind of call a really important cultural moment. I really believe that they turned what could have been a really combative experience for the LA Dodgers and their fans into a kind of, well, there are alternative nights that we can get behind. And they kind of just stood out in leadership around Christian faith and family. They did a lot for their organization here, I think. What do you think that parents and those that work with kids can learn as we encounter different societal conflicts that impact our kids like this?
Yeah, let's remember this example that it's not enough to just complain about what somebody is doing. Let's try to do what we can do. It reminds me of the change process that I teach often from Ephesians 4, 22 through 24, where you take off your old self and you put on your new self. And of course, change really takes root when you renew or change your mind, and that's done in the Holy Word of God. But the concept is that change means exchange. You take off one thing, you put on another thing. So here's an example where there was a Pride night that a lot of people were disappointed by. So rather than just twiddling your thumbs, or rather than just complaining and letting people know that you disagree with that decision, you choose to have an alternative. And you gave people with a different perspective a rally cry, something to rally around. And I think that's a really cool thing. Let's help our kids identify not just what they disagree with, but what they agree with, and then how to support that well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I kind of want to push on that topic of kind of we celebrate the things we agree with and kind of like stand maybe in opposition sometimes against the things that we don't agree with. Because I'm afraid sometimes when we look at these kind of things that happen in society, we look at it kind of as an us versus them situation. We kind of say maybe it's the church versus them, and we kind of make these strong stands. And we look at kind of gay pride events and people that are involved in them. Sometimes it can be natural to kind of, when we do that, to set up people that support them as kind of enemies. How should we talk to our kids about this? Because the Bible has really strong words and language for people that follow Jesus to not only love our neighbor, but to care for those who we might consider enemies and care for them in really, specific and unique ways. And when I look at this topic, I'm kind of understanding that this might be a challenge too, where people are just misinformed. They're misinformed in terms of kind of where identity comes from and what identity is like. And so is there helpful ways that we can kind of step into this, knowing that the natural bend for us oftentimes is to create an us versus them dichotomy, when really, in reality, we might need to just kind of look at people as if they're misinformed? I mean, is that a better way of looking at this? Or is there something to be said about this actually being an us versus them and we need to love our enemies? What are your thoughts there a little bit on that?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I can see a variety of perspectives. I agree that it's not a battle. We don't have to look at a us versus them battle. We know who the battle is. The battle's with the devil. The battle's with Satan. He's lost, but he doesn't know it yet. And he's strategic and wise and, not clueless, unfortunately. So he does know, how to play the game. And so he does attract people to his side of thinking, and then they're motivated just as we're motivated because we're on the side of God and righteousness and love in the purest way. So misinformed is a good word. They don't know the whole truth. I like to use the word deceived as well. I think they've been deceived. People who think that, the LGBTQ, there's nothing wrong with that. I think they're deceived. I don't think they've read the Bible, or they haven't read it with the eyes to see the truth. They can't hear the word of God. I love to tell children that we cannot hold people accountable to a standard they don't know. It's not appropriate. And so we love them and we inform them as best we can. But it can't be always a battle. There are good people on every side of the issue. And we don't know everything. And let's not assume that we do, and let's not act like we do. So deceived, misinformed, not in the family of God. They haven't read the word. They don't understand what we do about what love is really all about. We can make statements like that.
I think there's some important things for us to think about in this podcast, namely to understand that ideas do have consequences. But as my friend John Stonestreet says, they have consequences for people who bear the image of God. And I think that's something that Dr. Kathy brought out when she was talking about that passage from Ephesians chapter 4, beginning at verse 22. And this is what the writer of Ephesians says. You were taught with regard to your former life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. I think in light of everything that we kind of are encountering with this story specifically, but in other parts of culture, there's a continual dehumanization that happens when we simply make life about ideas and battles. And I think what the writer here in Ephesians is getting to, as he continues to write in later verses as well, that there's a call to not only address falsehood, but to speak truthfully to our neighbor. And that idea of we're all one body is something that our culture desperately needs right now. And as a little glimmer of light in some dark places, I think what the LA Dodgers teammates did to celebrate Christian faith and family is an example for us of how we can live into this cultural moment, that we have been put here on purpose, for a purpose, with a purpose, to bear Christ's image and celebrate kids in these different contexts. And I think what we talked about here today can be an inspiration to be a bright light in really dark times. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in our daily segment, Facing the Dark. As we move forward in the month of August, Dr. Kathy is doing a special Saturday series with her segment, Dr. Kathy Says, on going back to school. We'd love to hear some feedback from you. What are you encountering and engaging as you prepare your kids or to serve the kids in your community, knowing that they're heading back to school? How can we be an encouragement for you? And what are you struggling with? Send us an email to share your thoughts or your challenges. And Dr. Kathy will talk about it on the Saturday segment, Dr. Kathy Says. You can email me at wayne@ignitethefamily.com. Again, that's WAYNE@ignitethefamily.com. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook and the rest of us here at the Celebrate Kids team, I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here next week.